The wind that swept across the Wyoming Territory in the late 1880s did not merely blow. It scoured. It stripped the bark from the sagebrush and the hope from the eyes of men who thought they could tame the land with a plow and a prayer. For Clara Hart, the wind felt like a judgment. It bit through the threadbare weave of her woolen shawl, finding the hollow spaces between her ribs where hunger had settled weeks ago. She had been walking since dawn. Her boots, once sturdy leather, were now cracked and failing, the soles worn thin enough that she could feel every frozen rut in the wagon road. She carried a single bag, a carpet bag with a broken latch that she had tied shut with a strip of linen. Inside was everything she owned in the world, which amounted to a spare dress that was more patch than fabric, a comb with missing teeth, and a small, heavy stone from a riverbed in Kansas, a foolish keepsake she could not bring herself to discard. The landscape here was vast and indifferent. The sky was a bruised purple as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, skeletal shadows across the snow-dusted plains. Clara stumbled. Her knees hit the hard earth, the shock of it rattling her teeth. She stayed there for a moment, breathing in the scent of impending snow and dry earth. It would be so easy to stay down. The cold was a narcotic now, making her limbs heavy and her mind slow, but if she stopped, she would die. And despite everything, despite the shame that clung to her skin like the trail dust and the memories of a life that had shattered like cheap glass, she was not ready to die. She forced herself up. Ahead, perhaps a mile distant, she saw the faint, gray plume of smoke rising against the darkening sky. A ranch. It took her another hour to reach the perimeter fence. The wooden posts were thick and sturdy, strung with wire that looked new. This was not a homesteader's desperate claim. This was the kingdom of a man who had money. The main gate was an archway of rough-hewn timber with the words Ironwood Ranch burned into the wood. Clara stopped at the gate, her breath clouding in the freezing air. She was shaking violently now, her body's last protest against the exposure. Beyond the gate, a large house stood 2 stories tall, painted white with a wraparound porch. Barns and bunkhouses sprawled out behind it. It looked warm. It looked like a fortress against the night. Movement near the porch caught her eye. 2 figures, small and bundled in mismatched coats, were peering at her through the slats of the rail fence that separated the yard from the drive. Clara gripped the fence post to steady herself. She looked at them, and they looked at her. They were little girls. The older one looked to be about 9 years old, her hair a tangled nest of dark brown that had not seen a brush in days. She stood protectively in front of the younger one, who could not have been more than 6. The little one sucked on a thumb, her eyes wide and round, staring at the woman who looked like a specter risen from the sage. They did not wave, they did not run. They watched with the eerie stillness of children who had learned that adults were unpredictable creatures. The rumble of hoofbeats interrupted the silence. Clara turned her head, the motion making the world swim dizzily. 2 riders were approaching from the east, driving a small herd of stragglers toward the pens. The lead rider sat on a massive black gelding. He wore a duster coat that fell to his calves and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his brow. Even from a distance, he radiated a kind of dangerous competency. The riders slowed as they saw her. The man on the black horse signaled to his companion, who tipped his hat and continued with the cattle. The lead rider turned his mount toward the gate. Wyatt Morgan looked down at the woman clinging to his fence. He had seen desperate people before. The war had produced thousands of them, and the peace that followed had produced thousands more. But there was something particularly wretched about this figure. She was thin to the point of emaciation, her face gaunt and gray with cold. Her eyes, however, were startlingly clear. They were the color of wet slate, and they held no fear, only a terrible, hollow exhaustion. He pulled the horse up, the animal snorting and dancing sideways, kicking up puffs of snow. Wyatt kept one gloved hand on the reins and rested the other on his thigh. Near the heavy Colt revolver he wore not for show, but for use. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting over wind and cattle. It was not unkind, but it was devoid of warmth. Clara tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She coughed, a harsh, rattling sound. She let go of the fence post and sank to her knees in the snow. Not because she wanted to plead, but because her legs simply refused to hold her any longer. She looked up at him. "Work," she rasped. Her voice was a broken thing. "I need work." Wyatt narrowed his eyes. He looked at her hands, red and raw from the cold, and the way her shoulders shook beneath the inadequate shawl. "We have hands," he said. "I have no need for more." "Please," Clara said. She did not reach out. She kept her hands clasped tight against her chest to preserve warmth. "I can clean, I can mend, I can cook. I will sleep in the barn. I will take scraps. Just do not turn me away." The wind howled, cutting between them. Wyatt looked from the woman to the house. He saw Annie and Rosie standing on the porch, watching. He had told them to stay inside. He had told them 100 times to stay out of the cold, but they were wild things now, slipping through his fingers like water. They looked at this stranger, not with the suspicion he felt, but with a curiosity that made his chest ache. He looked back at the woman. She was going to die if he left her here. That was a fact. The temperature would drop another 20 degrees by midnight. He was a hard man, a man who valued land and legacy above sentiment. But he was not a monster. "Get up," he said. Clara tried, but her limbs were lead. Wyatt swore softly under his breath. He swung down from the saddle in a fluid motion, his boots crunching in the snow. He tied the horse to the fence and walked over to her. He did not offer her his arm in the manner of a gentleman. Instead, he reached down and took her elbow, hauling her to her feet with an easy strength that startled her. "Walk," he commanded. He led her not to the barn, but toward the house. The girls on the porch scattered as they approached, disappearing around the corner of the house like frightened deer. Wyatt opened the heavy oak front door and ushered Clara inside. The heat hit her like a physical blow. It smelled of wood smoke, roasted meat, and beeswax. The sudden warmth made her head spin, and black spots danced in her vision. She stumbled, and Wyatt caught her again, his grip firm. "Mrs. Gable," he called out. A bustling woman in a gray apron appeared from the back of the house, wiping floury hands on a towel. She had a face like a withered apple and eyes that missed nothing. She stopped dead when she saw Clara. "Land sakes, Mr. Morgan," she exclaimed. "What is this?" "She is hungry," Wyatt said. Releasing Clara, she found her footing. "Feed her." "But sir, who is she?" "She is a woman who needs a meal," Wyatt said, his tone closing the subject. "Put her at the kitchen table. I will be studying." He turned and walked away without a backward glance, his spurs jingling softly on the hardwood floor. Clara stood shivering in the entryway, clutching her carpet bag. "Mrs. Gable sighed. A long, loud sound, but her face softened. "Well, don't just stand there dripping on the rug," the older woman said. "Come on, the stove is hot. The kitchen was the heart of the house, a large room dominated by a massive cast-iron stove that radiated a steady, comforting heat. Clara was seated at a rough pine table and given a bowl of beef stew and a thick slice of cornbread. Her hands shook so badly she could hardly hold the spoon. She forced herself to eat slowly, knowing that if she gorged herself, she would only be sick. The first mouthful was an explosion of flavor: salt, savory meat, the sweetness of carrots. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. She blinked them away furiously. She would not cry. She had promised herself in Kansas that she was done crying. As she ate, she became aware of eyes on her again. She turned her head slightly. The two little girls were peeking around the doorframe of the pantry. The older one, Annie, had a smear of dirt on her cheek. The younger one, Rosie, was clutching a rag doll that was missing an arm. Clara lowered her spoon. She did not smile, for she had forgotten how, but she softened her expression. "Hello?" she whispered. They did not answer. They stepped closer, drawn by the novelty of her presence. Mrs. Gable was busy at the sink, clanging pots with unnecessary vigor. muttering about vagrants and the softness of Mr. Morgan's head. Rosie took a brave step forward. She reached out a small, sticky hand and touched the fabric of Clara's shawl. "It's torn," the child said. Her voice was high and clear. "Yes," Clara said. "It's snagged on a briar. I have a coat," Rosie said. "It has buttons. That is very lucky." Clara replied softly, "Buttons are good for keeping the cold out." Annie stepped up beside her sister. She was taller, her gaze more assessing. She looked at Clara's hands, then at her face. "Are you staying?" Annie asked. Clara hesitated. She looked at the empty bowl, then at the warmth of the stove. "No," she said. "I am just passing through. Your father, he was kind enough to give me a meal." "He is not kind," Annie said flatly. "He is just rich." Clara looked at the girl, surprised by the bitterness in such a young voice. Before she could answer, Wyatt appeared in the doorway. He had removed his duster and hat. He wore a dark vest over a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms scarred by work and war. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "Annie, Rosie," he said, "upstairs, now." The girls flinched. The connection between them and Clara broke instantly. They turned and ran past him, their footsteps thumping heavily on the stairs. Wyatt watched them go, his jaw tightening. Then he turned his gaze to Clara. He walked into the room, pulling a chair out opposite her. He sat down heavily. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara Hart. Where are you from?" "Miss Hart." "Mrs. Hart," she corrected automatically, though the title felt like a lie now. "I came from Kansas." "That is a long walk," Wyatt observed. "I caught rides where I could. Wagons. A train for 100 miles until the money ran out." "And, where are you going?" "West," she said. "The West is a big place." Clara looked down at her hands. "Nowhere," she admitted. "I am going nowhere. I just needed to be away from where I was." Wyatt studied her. He was a man who dealt in facts, the weight of a steer, the price of grain, the probability of snow. People were messier, and he generally avoided them. But he had watched from the hallway as she spoke to his daughters. He had seen the way Rosie, who had not spoken to a stranger in 6 months, had reached out to touch her shawl. He had seen the way Clara's voice, raspy from the cold, had dropped to a gentle murmur that seemed to soothe the air in the room. His house was cold. Not in temperature, the fires roared day and night, but in spirit. Since Elizabeth died 2 years ago, the silence in Ironwood Ranch had become suffocating. He knew how to run a ranch. He knew how to kill a man if he had to. He did not know how to braid hair. He did not know how to chase the nightmares away without barking orders. He was watching his daughters turn feral and hard, just like him, and the guilt of it was a stone he carried in his gut every day. Clara pushed the empty bowl away. She placed her hands on the table and pushed herself up. Her legs were stiff, but the food had given her a fragile strength. "Thank you for the meal, Mr. Morgan," she said. "It was the best I have had in a long time. I will go now." Wyatt remained seated. He watched her pick up her bag. She looked ridiculous, standing there in her rags, preparing to walk back out into a killing frost with nothing but a broken bag and dignity. "Sit down," he said. Clara froze. I cannot stay." The housekeeper said, "I own the house, not Mrs. Gable." Wyatt said, "Sit down." She sat, perching on the edge of the chair, wary now. "I told you I have no need for a maid," Wyatt said slowly. "And that is the truth. Mrs. Gable manages the house. My men manage the herds. I do not need someone to scrub floors or peel potatoes." Clara lowered her gaze. "I understand. I did not mean to beg. I did not say I have no needs." Wyatt interrupted. He leaned forward, the lamplight catching the gray in his dark hair. He looked tired. It was a profound, bone-deep weariness that Clara recognized, for she felt it herself. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said. "Since then, this house has been difficult. My daughters have no one. They have a father who is out on the range from dawn until dusk. And when he is home, he is too tired to be what they need, Mrs. Gable feeds them and clothes them, but she does not raise them. Clara stayed silent, clutching her bag. They are becoming wild, Wyatt said, angry, especially Annie. And Rosie is forgetting what it feels like to be held. He looked Clara in the eye. The intensity of his gaze made her want to shrink back, but she held her ground. I watched you with them, he said, for 5 minutes. They were children again, not ghosts haunting the hallways. Just children. I like children, Clara whispered. I have a proposition for you. Clara Hart, Wyatt said. He placed his hands on the table. They were large hands, calloused and scarred. I do not need a maid, he repeated. I need a mother. The word hung in the warm air of the kitchen, heavy and strange. Clara stared at him. I do not understand, she said. I'm offering you a job, Wyatt said, but not a common one. I want you to stay here. You will live in the house. You will have the room at the end of the hall. Your duty will be the girls. You will teach them. You will listen to them. You will make sure they are washed and dressed and that they learn how to be women in a world that is hard on women. You will be the buffer between them and the silence of this house. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. You want a governess? No, Wyatt said sharply. A governess teaches sums and reading. I can pay for a school teacher in town for that. I need someone to... He struggled for the word, his pragmatism failing him for a moment. I need someone to keep them from becoming like me. Cold, hard, alone. He paused, then added, his voice lower. I am asking you to be the mother my girls need. If you can. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. The mother they need. The irony of it was a knife in her chest. She thought of the small grave in Kansas, the mound of earth she'd had to leave behind. She thought of the crying she still heard in her dreams, the phantom weight of a child she had failed to protect. I am not, she stammered. Mr. Morgan, you do not know me. I am a stranger. I have nothing. I know you walked through a blizzard rather than lie down and die, Wyatt said. I know you have kind hands. And I know my daughters looked at you without fear. That is enough for me. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a gold coin. He set it on the table. $5 a month, he said. Room and board. You will have free rein with the girls. I will not interfere unless I must. Clara looked at the coin. It was more money than she had seen in a year, but it wasn't the money. It was the offer of a home, a sanctuary, a place where the wind could not reach her, but the fear was there, coiling in her stomach. She was broken. She knew it, the abuse she had suffered, the loss she had endured. It had cracked something inside her. What if she broke these children too? What if her sadness was contagious? I am not a whole person, she whispered, almost to herself. Wyatt heard her. He did not flinch. Neither are they, he said, and neither am I. We are all just trying to survive the winter. Mrs. Hart. He stood up. Think about it. You can sleep in the spare room tonight regardless. If you are gone in the morning, I will understand. If you are at breakfast, I will assume you have accepted. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Clara alone with the humming of the stove and the terrifying possibility of a future. Clara sat there for a long time. She reached out and touched the gold coin. It was cold against her fingertip. She thought of Rosie's small hand on her shawl. She thought of Annie's fierce, protective glare. They were hurting. They were motherless and drifting. She closed her eyes. She could run. She could take the meal and the night's rest and vanish in the morning. But the thought of the road, of the endless, scouring wind, made her shudder. She picked up the coin and slipped it into her pocket. It felt heavy, like a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. She stood up, her legs trembling. She wasn't trembling from the cold anymore. She was trembling because she knew she was going to stay, and she was terrified that she would fail them, just as she had failed before. Clara blew out the lantern on the table and walked toward the stairs, toward the room at the end of the hall, and toward a life she had never asked for but now desperately, fearfully, wanted. The first weeks at Ironwood Ranch were a lesson in silence, The house was vast and cold, not from the winter, but from an absence of life that clung to the heavy curtains and dark furniture. Clara Hart moved through it like a ghost, her footsteps muffled on the thick rugs, her voice kept to a low murmur. She was a creature of the shadows, and she understood that her new position was conditional. She was there to fill a space, but not to take one. She began by doing the things no one else wanted to do. She rose before dawn, hours before Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, and scrubbed the soot from the fireplace hearth. She mended the pile of linens in the laundry room, her stitches small and neat, replacing the clumsy bachelor work repairs that had been done before. She was given a small, plain room at the end of the upstairs hall, a former sewing room that contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair. It was more luxurious than she had known in years. Wyatt Morgan kept his distance. Just as he had promised, he was a presence more than a man. She would hear his heavy boots on the porch, the jingle of his spurs as he walked down the hall to his study, and the low, authoritative rumble of his voice as he gave orders to his foreman. He ate his meals alone in his study, taking a tray from Mrs. Gable and leaving it outside the door when he was finished. But Clara knew she was being watched. Sometimes, when she was sweeping the porch, she would feel a prickling on her neck and look up to see him sitting on his horse by the barn, his gaze fixed on the house. When she was reading to the girls by the fire, she would sense a shadow in the doorway and turn, but he would already be gone, leaving only the faint scent of cold air and tobacco. He was assessing her. She knew, like he would a new horse, checking its teeth and its temperament, judging its worth. The thought did not frighten her. It steadied her. She understood transactions. This was one. She provided a service, and in return, she was safe. The girls were wary. Annie, the older one, was sharp and suspicious. She watched Clara with a child's unfiltered resentment, seeing her not as a comfort, but as an intruder. When Clara tried to brush her hair, Annie would snatch the brush away. "I can do it," Annie would snap, her dark eyes flashing. "I do not need your help." Rosie, the younger one, was different. She was a soft, quiet creature who seemed to have faded into the background. She trailed Clara from room to room, silent as a kitten, clutching her one-armed rag doll. She would sit on the kitchen floor, watching Clara peel potatoes, her thumb tucked in her mouth, her eyes wide and absorbing. She was a child starved of touch, and Clara ached for her. The work was hard, but Clara welcomed it. The labor was a balm, a way to exhaust her body so her mind would not have the strength to wander at night. But the nights were always the worst. In the small, cold room at the end of the hall, the memories found her. They were patient. They waited until the house was still, until the last embers in the stove had died, and then they would come. She would be mending a shirt, the repetitive motion of the needle lulling her, and suddenly the smell of the wool would be replaced by the stale, sharp scent of cheap whiskey. She would be back in the cramped tenement in Kansas, the air thick and hot. She would see Elias. He had been a handsome man, a deputy with a silver star and a quick smile that charmed everyone but those who truly knew him. He had claimed to love her, and she, young and foolish, had believed him. He had said her name, Clara, like it was a prayer, until it became a curse. The memories came in flashes, sharp as a knife's edge. The sound of his belt buckle clearing the leather, the way he would grab her jaw, his fingers digging in. "You belong to me," he would whisper, his breath hot on her face. "You think anyone else would want you? You are nothing." She had stayed. She had stayed because she was afraid, and then she stayed because she was pregnant. That memory was the one that broke her, every time. The brief, secret joy she had felt, the hope that a child would change him, soften him. She had been wrong. When she told him, his face had not softened. It had turned to stone. He had looked at her with a cold disgust that froze her blood. He beat her that night. He beat her until the floorboards were slick with her shame and her hope. He made her choose. That was what he had called it. A choice. Her Clara, or that thing inside her. She still dreamed of the child's cries. In her sleep, she would hear a thin, desperate wail. She would reach out in the darkness, her arms aching to hold a child she had never been allowed to know. She would wake up with her hands clenched, her face wet with tears she did not remember shedding, the sound of the crying echoing in the empty room. About a month after her arrival, the ranch's supplies ran low. Wyatt announced it at breakfast, a meal he had begun taking in the dining room, though he sat at the head of the table and said nothing, reading a day-old newspaper from Cheyenne. "We're going to town," he said, his voice directed at Mrs. Gable. "I need a list." The housekeeper nodded. "Flour, salt, coffee, and bacon." "Sir, and we are out of lye for the soap." Wyatt folded the paper. He looked down the long table at Clara, who was trying to coax Rosie to eat a spoonful of oatmeal. "The girls need winter boots," he said. "The ones they have are cracked." Clara looked up. His eyes met hers. "You will come," he said. "You know their sizes." It was not a question. Clara nodded, her heart sinking. She had been safe within the confines of Ironwood. The fence line was her barrier against the world. The thought of facing civilization, of seeing other people, made her stomach clench. The wagon ride to Junction Creek was cold and silent. Wyatt drove, his shoulders set, his hat pulled low. Clara sat beside him on the bench, her hands tucked into her sleeves. The girls were bundled in the back of the wagon, nestled among wool blankets. Junction Creek was a typical frontier town, a double row of false-fronted buildings rising from the muddy track of the main street. It was loud and smelled of wet wood, horse manure, and frying meat. As Wyatt pulled the wagon up in front of the mercantile, Clara felt the old, familiar shame rise in her throat. She was wearing her old clothes, the ones she had arrived in, now washed and mended but still marking her as poor. Wyatt helped the girls down, then turned to her. He did not offer a hand, he simply waited. Clara climbed down, her skirts dragging in the mud. She kept her eyes low, her shawl pulled tight around her head, hiding her face. Inside, the mercantile was warm, a cavern of chaos that smelled of coffee beans, cured leather, and new cotton. The proprietor, Mr. Davies, smiled when he saw Wyatt. "Mr. Morgan," he said, rubbing his hands on his apron. "A pleasure. Cold one out there." Wyatt handed him the list. "Just fill this, and add 2 pairs of girls' boots, the best you have." While Mr. Davies bustled off, Clara took Annie and Rosie to the back, where the boots were stacked. She knelt on the floor, measuring their feet. It was then that she heard the whispers. 2 women, dressed in fine wool coats with fur collars, were standing by the fabric counter, ostensibly looking at ribbons. Their voices were low, but in the close confines of the store. Clara heard every word. "Is that him? The one who lost his wife?" "Yes, that's Wyatt Morgan, Ironwood Ranch. He owns half the valley." "And who is that?" the other woman sniffed. "Some new woman he picked up. Mrs. Gable told my cousin that she arrived on foot. I looked like a beggar. A beggar. Land sakes. What is she doing with him?" The first woman gave a low, knowing laugh. "What do you think she is doing? A rich man like that, alone in that big house. A man has needs. He just found one who does not ask for a wedding ring first. She is not. She is a harlot." Clara's face burned hot, then went ice cold. She felt the blood drain from her head, leaving her dizzy. The word harlot echoed in the small store, louder than a gunshot. She dropped the boot she was holding. Annie, who had heard it too, glared at the women. Her small face was tight with fury. Clara grabbed the girl's hands. "They're boots." "Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice strained. "They are ready." Wyatt was at the counter, paying. He looked at her. He saw her pale, stricken face. He saw the way her hands were shaking. He looked over at the 2 women, who immediately busied themselves with the ribbons. Wyatt paid his bill. He loaded the sacks of flour and bacon into the wagon. Clara and the girls were already seated. Just as he was about to climb up, a large man with a red face and a loud voice stepped out of the saloon next door. It was Silas Henderson, a neighboring rancher. In the morning, Morgan Henderson boomed, slapping dust from his hat. "See, you are stocking up for the winter." Wyatt nodded, his hand on the wagon rail. Silas. Henderson's gaze drifted past Wyatt to Clara. He looked her up and down, a slow, insulting appraisal. A grin spread across his face. He lowered his voice. "But not enough. A man has needs, I suppose, but a charity whore. Wyatt, right under your girls' noses?" Clara flinched as if struck. Wyatt did not move. He did not turn around. He simply let go of the wagon. He walked slowly toward Silas Henderson. He did not raise his voice. He did not touch the pistol at his hip. He just looked at him. Wyatt Morgan's stare was a famous thing in the territory. It was cold. It was the color of the winter sky. It was devoid of all emotion, and in its emptiness, it promised a capacity for violence that 100 shouting men could not match. Silas Henderson's grin faltered. He took a step back. "You will apologize to Mrs. Hart," Wyatt said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise of the street. Henderson blustered, his face turning a deeper red. "Now, Wyatt, I was just funnin'. I will not ask you again. Silas." Henderson looked into Wyatt's eyes. He saw no mercy there. He saw the man who had ridden with Quantrill and lived. He saw the man who had built an empire from nothing. He swallowed, his bravado vanishing like smoke. "My apologies." "Ma'am," he stammered, looking at Clara. "Mrs. Hart, no offense intended." He tipped his hat, then turned and disappeared back into the saloon. Wyatt stood there for a moment, his back to the wagon. He took a deep breath, then slowly, he returned. He climbed into the driver's seat. He did not look at Clara. He did not say a word. He just slapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, leaving Junction Creek behind. The ride home was even more silent than the ride there. Clara sat rigid, the word whore burning in her ears. She had been defended, but she felt no victory. She just felt exposed. That night, she did not come down for supper. She sat in her room in the dark, watching the snow begin to fall outside her window. She heard Wyatt's footsteps in the hall. He paused outside her door. She held her breath. She heard him continue on, his footsteps retreating. Later, much later, when she was sure everyone was asleep, she crept down to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she passed the coat rack by the door, she saw something new. Folded neatly on the bench was a coat. It was not a new coat, but it was a good one. It was heavy wool, lined with thick, soft sheepskin. It was a man's coat, but it was small for a man, perhaps one he had outgrown. It smelled faintly of leather, cold air, and him. Clara touched the fleece lining. It was the kindest, most terrifying gesture she could imagine. He had not spoken to her. He had not offered comfort. He had simply seen a need and filled it. He had provided. She took the coat back to her room and laid it on her bed. She did not cry. She just sat and looked at it, understanding that her debt to this man was growing deeper every day. The routine of the house settled around her. The incident in town seemed to change things. Mrs. Gable was still curt, but she no longer looked at Clara with open suspicion. Annie, having witnessed her father defend Clara, was less hostile. She still refused to be helped, but she no longer ran when Clara entered a room. The real change was in Rosie. One afternoon, Clara was brushing Rosie's hair. The child had fine, flaxen hair that tangled easily. Rosie was leaning back against Clara's knees, humming a tuneless little song. "You have hair like corn silk," Clara murmured, working a knot free. Rosie giggled. "Annie's is like a horse's tail. Annie is just in a hurry," Clara said, smiling. "It's nice," Rosie said, her voice suddenly small. "Ma used to sing when she brushed my hair." Clara's hand stilled. The comb hovered over Rosie's head. The silence in the room was sudden and heavy. Rosie looked up, her blue eyes wide with a terrible realization. "I mean, Miss Clara, I did not mean—" The little girl scrambled off the stool, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. She was terrified. She had broken the unspoken rule. She had mentioned the ghost. "Rosie," Clara said, her voice aching. "It is all right." But Rosie was already running, her small footsteps pounding down the hall. Clara set the brush down. Her hands were shaking. She stood up and walked, not ran, to the laundry room. It was the only place in the house that felt like hers. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the washtub, breathing in the sharp, clean smell of lye soap. And she cried. She cried for the little girl who missed her mother. She cried for the woman who had died. And she cried for the baby she, herself, had lost, the child whose hair she would never get to brush. She was scrubbing her face with the sleeve of her dress when Mrs. Gable came in, a basket of laundry balanced on her hip. Clara straightened up, sniffing. The housekeeper looked at her, her expression unreadable. She set the basket down. "Mr. Morgan is looking for you," she said. "He is out by the stables. Says he is checking the north pasture and needs a second rider." Clara blinked, confused. "But I cannot ride." "Mrs. Gable snorted. "Well, you are about to learn. He said to wear the coat." Wyatt was waiting. 2 horses saddled. One was his large black gelding. The other was a smaller, calmer-looking mare. He handed Clara the reins without a word and mounted. She, clumsy in her skirts and the heavy coat, managed to pull herself into the saddle. They rode for almost an hour, Wyatt setting a pace that was just short of a gallop. The wind was brutal. It scoured the snow from the ground and threw it in their faces, stinging like needles. The coat he had given her was a godsend. Without it, she would have frozen in 10 minutes. He led her to a high ridge overlooking the northern expanse of his land. It was a vast, empty, terrifyingly beautiful place. The wind howled, a high, lonely sound. He reined in his horse, and Clara stopped beside him. "This is where it happened," Wyatt said. His voice was flat, almost stolen by the wind. Clara looked at him, her face numb with cold. "This is where Elizabeth died," he said. He did not look at her. He stared out at the valley, as if seeing it on a different day. The storm came up from the north, fast, like a gray wall. She was a better rider than me. She always was. She was cocky. She thought she could outrun it. He paused, and Clara waited, the wind whipping her hair across her face. The horse came back to the barn alone. 3 hours later, the bridle was broken. It took me and my men 2 days to find her. The snow, it had covered her. She looked peaceful, like she was sleeping. Clara did not know what to say. The silence stretched, filled only by the wind. He turned in the saddle, and his eyes met hers. They were raw, the color of a winter sky, and filled with a pain so deep it shocked her. "I have not brought another soul here," he said. "Not the girls, not my foreman, no one." He looked at her, and the distance between them, the distance of employer and servant, master and vagrant, seemed to collapse. "I never touched another woman after," he said. The confession hung in the air between them. It was a burden and an offering. The snow, which had been a stinging flurry, began to fall in soft, heavy flakes. One landed on Clara's dark hair, right at her temple. Another caught in her eyelashes. She shivered, but not from the cold. She shivered from the intensity of his gaze, from the raw, dangerous honesty of the moment. Wyatt reached out. His gloved hand moved, seemingly of its own accord. He was going to wipe the snow away. His fingers, thick and rough from leather and work, brushed the side of her face, his thumb grazing the shell of her ear. Clara stopped breathing. His eyes dropped from her eyes to her mouth. The world shrank. There was only the sound of the wind, the heavy fall of the snow, the smell of leather, and the impossible, undeniable heat from his hand. He leaned in. She leaned in. It was not a choice. It was starvation. It was 2 frozen things reaching for a spark of warmth. His breath was on her lips. She could feel the rough texture of his glove against her jaw. He stopped. He was millimeters from her mouth. His eyes closed, and a spasm of pain, or maybe regret, crossed his face. He pulled back, his hand yanking away as if she had burned him. "I am not ready," he said. His voice was a harsh, broken rasp. He wheeled his horse around, turning his back to her, a rigid, unmoving silhouette against the gray sky. Clara sat frozen, the cold rushing back in, sharp and merciless. The place where his hand had been burned, and the place where his lips had not ached. She felt the loss of that almost kiss like a physical blow. She forced the words from her tight throat, whispering them to his back. Me neither. He did not turn. He just kicked his horse into a trot, heading back toward the cold, silent house they both called home. Clara took a breath, the icy air searing her lungs, and followed him, knowing, with a terrible, sinking certainty, that they were both liars. The winter did not release its grip on Ironwood Ranch. It was broken. It was a slow, muddy surrender. The snow receded in stubborn patches, revealing the matted, brown grass beneath. Then the spring rains came, not as a gentle mist, but as a series of cold, driving downpours that turned the ranch yard into a lake of mud. The world smelled of wet earth and new pine. Inside the house, a different kind of thaw was taking place. The silence that had defined Clara's first months there began to fill with new sounds. The first was the sound of a comb moving through tangled hair. Annie, her pride as fierce and stubborn as her father's, had been hacking at her own hair with shears, leaving it a wild, uneven mess. One rainy afternoon, Clara sat her down not with an order, but a request. "Let me try," Clara had said, holding up a pair of sharp sewing scissors. "I can at least make it even." Annie had sat rigid, expecting to be reprimanded, but Clara merely trimmed the edges, her touch light and professional. When she was done, she picked up the brush. "It will be easier to manage," Clara said, her voice soft. She began to braid the thick, dark hair. Annie's shoulders remained stiff for a full 5 minutes, but the rhythmic pull and stroke of the brush was a hypnotic, forgotten comfort. By the time Clara tied off the end with a bit of ribbon, the girl's head was leaning back against her, her eyes half closed. From that day, the morning ritual was set. Annie and Rosie would come to Clara's room after dressing, and she would braid their hair before breakfast. The next sound was singing. It was quiet at first. Clara was in the laundry room, scrubbing one of Wyatt's shirts, and the lye soap and the gray light reminded her of a lullaby her own mother used to sing. It was a simple tune about a riverboat and a silver moon. She hummed it, then, forgetting herself, let the words come out in a low, clear voice. Rosie, who had been trailing her, stopped in the doorway. She tilted her head, listening. When Clara finished and looked up, the girl's eyes were wide. "That was pretty," Rosie whispered, as if a loud voice might break the spell. Clara felt a blush rise to her neck. "It is just an old song. Sing it again." So Clara sang it again, and that night, when Rosie was tucked in bed, she asked for it again. Annie, in the next bed, pretended to be asleep, but Clara saw her shoulders relax as the melody filled the dark room. Soon, the lullaby was as much a part of their bedtime as blowing out the lamp. The final sound was reading. Wyatt had a study lined with books, but they were books on animal husbandry, engineering, and Roman history. Clara, browsing them one evening, found a worn volume of poetry and a thick book of English folk tales tucked on a bottom shelf. They must have been Elizabeth's. She began reading to the girls after supper. She read about knights and dragons and mischievous sprites. She gave them all voices, her voice rising and falling, painting pictures in the air. Wyatt began to see the changes. He would come in from the range, soaked from the rain and smelling of wet wool and horse, and he would stop in the hall. He would hear Annie, his sharp, angry Annie, laughing at a story. He would hear Rosie chattering, her voice no longer a frightened whisper, but a bright, childish stream of questions. He saw his daughters. Their faces were clean, their hair was braided, their clothes were mended. But it was more than that. The haunted, feral look was gone from their eyes. They were alive again. They were children. His gratitude was a heavy, unspoken thing. He was a man of action, not words. He did not know how to say thank you. So, he showed her, one morning, He found her in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Gable plan the week's meals. Mrs. Hart, he said, and she started. He rarely used her name. I need you to ride out with me. Mrs. Gable looked up from her dough, surprised. But, Mr. Morgan, the girl has duties. Wyatt's gaze was flat. This is one of them. The mare is saddled. Clara, confused, wiped her hands on her apron and followed him. He did not take her to the ridge this time. He took her on a long, slow tour of the ranch's perimeter. This is the east fence, he said, his voice all business. The wires go slack here every spring when the ground thaws. It is a full day's work for 2 men to tighten it. I need you to know where it is. He showed her the box canyon where they sheltered the herd during blizzards. He showed her the stream that went dry in August. He spoke of the land, the cattle, the dangers, and the work. He was not making conversation. He was imparting knowledge. He was treating her not as a maid, not as a governess, but as a partner. The responsibility grew. A few weeks later, he came into the dining room where she was folding napkins. He dropped a heavy, leather-bound ledger on the table. You read and write. He stated, yes, Mr. Morgan. Good. Mrs. Gable is ordering twice the flour we need and not enough coffee. The men are complaining. From now on, you will manage the kitchen supplies. You will manage the household accounts. The book is self-explanatory. Clara stared at the ledger. This was his ranch. This was the book that held the finances of his empire. I do not know if I am qualified, she stammered. You will learn, he said. You seem to learn quickly. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. You will need to use the desk, he added. In the study. The study was his sanctuary. No one, not even Mrs. Gable, entered without his permission. Clara's first time sitting in his large leather chair, the scent of his tobacco and old paper surrounding her. She felt a tremor of fear, but she opened the book. The numbers were a mess. Mrs. Gable, for all her skills, was no bookkeeper. Clara worked for hours, her hand cramping. She organized the supplies, calculated the costs, and found a discrepancy of nearly $50 from the previous month. When Wyatt returned that night, he found her asleep at his desk, her head pillowed on her arms, a long column of neat figures on the page beside her. He stood in the doorway and watched her. The firelight softened the harsh lines of exhaustion on her face. He saw the ink stain on her finger. He felt a strange, protective urge that had nothing to do with his daughters. It was an urge that worried him. He cleared his throat. Clara jerked awake, her heart pounding. I am sorry, Mr. Morgan, I must have... You found the error from the feed store, he said, ignoring her apology. He pointed to her notes. Yes, they overcharged you for the oats. I know, I have been fighting with them about it for a month. He picked up the ledger and looked at her new pages. Her handwriting was elegant, the numbers precise. Good, he said. It was the highest praise he knew how to give. The fragile peace they had built was shattered by the sky. The storm broke in the middle of the night. It was not a gentle spring rain, but a violent, concussive assault. Thunder cracked so loud the windows of the house rattled in their frames. Rain lashed against the glass like thrown gravel. Clara sat up in bed, her heart pounding. The first crack had been so loud. It had dragged her from a dream of Elias. For a terrifying moment, she thought the sound had been a gunshot. Another crash of thunder, this one directly overhead, shook the foundations of the house. It was followed by a high, terrified scream. Clara was out of bed before the sound faded, pulling on her robe. She ran down the hall to the girls' room. Annie was sitting up in her bed, her hands over her ears. But she was not the one who had screamed. Rosie's bed was empty. Clara! Annie yelled over the sound of the rain. She is gone. Clara's blood ran cold. She ran back into the hallway. Rosie! A flash of lightning illuminated the hall, and in it, Clara saw a small figure huddled at the far end, outside Wyatt's door. Rosie was weeping, her small body shaking. Rosie, honey, I'm here, Clara said, rushing forward. She scooped the child up. Rosie wrapped her arms and legs around her, burying her face in Clara's neck. Her sobs muffled. It was too loud. She cried, Make it stop. Let's go to my room. Clara whispered, her heart aching for the little girl. "We will be safe there." She carried Rosie back to her own narrow bed and tucked her under the covers. She sat on the edge, stroking the girl's hair, murmuring the lullaby about the riverboat. Rosie quieted, but she was still trembling, her eyes fixed on the window. The door opened. Wyatt stood there, silhouetted against the dark hallway. He was in his nightshirt, a heavy wool robe thrown over it. His feet were bare. I heard screaming, he said. His voice was rough with sleep. "Rosie?" Clara explained. "The thunder." Wyatt came into the room. It was the first time he had ever been inside her room. He looked at the small, plain space, and then at his daughter, who was huddled under Clara's quilt. He walked over and sat on the other side of the bed. The mattress sagged under his weight. He said nothing. He just looked at Rosie. "It is just the sky. Rosie girl," he said, his voice softer than Clara had ever heard it. "It cannot hurt you." A new flash of lightning lit the room, and the thunder cracked again, almost instantly. Rosie cried out and burrowed deeper, her hand reaching out, finding Clara's. Wyatt sighed. He looked across the small bed at Clara. Their knees were almost touching. "She never minded the storms," he said quietly. "Not when Elizabeth was alive." Clara just nodded, her hand clasping Rosie's. They sat in silence for a long time, the two adults a bulwark against the storm, with the child safe between them. The rain hammered on the roof. Wyatt's hand was resting on the quilt, near Clara's. He had large, capable hands, scarred and calloused. Clara looked at her own, which were resting near his. Their fingers brushed. It was nothing, a feather-light touch, an accident. Neither of them moved. The storm raged outside, but in the small room, the air became thick and charged, quieter than silence. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the heat of his skin. He did not pull away. She did not pull away. Slowly, his fingers moved, just a fraction of an inch, covering hers. His thumb stroked the back of her hand, a single, deliberate gesture. It was not a passionate touch. It was a touch of shared solitude, of understanding. It was a touch that said, "I see you. You are here. I am here." Clara's entire body became hot, a jolt of feeling, so powerful and so long dormant, shot through her. It was a desire. It was a sharp, aching need that had nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with the man sitting across from her. The thunder faded to a low rumble. Rosie's breathing evened out. She was asleep. Clara gently pulled her hand away. The loss of his touch was a sudden, aching cold. Wyatt cleared his throat, as if waking from a dream. He looked at his sleeping daughter. "I will take her back," he murmured. "No," Clara whispered. "Let her stay. She is safe here." Wyatt looked at Clara. His eyes were dark in the dim light, and she could not read his expression. He nodded. He stood up, a large, imposing shadow. He walked to the door, then stopped. "Clara," he said. She looked up at him. "Thank you." Then he was gone. Clara sat there for a long time, listening to the rain and the even breathing of the child in her bed. She was trembling. She lifted the hand he had touched and held it to her cheek. It still felt warm. Later, alone in her room, the desire returned, sharp and insistent. She lay in the dark, Rosie having been returned to her own bed, and thought of Wyatt's hand. She thought of his quiet voice. She thought of the way he had looked at her on the ridge. She touched her own shoulder, her hand tracing her collarbone. It had been so long since she had been touched by anyone, except in violence. Her body, which she had come to think of as a ruined, broken thing, was alive. It was humming. The memory of Elias rose up, his cruel words, his bruising hands. "You are nothing. You are filth." Shame washed over her, cold and immediate. How could she feel this? How could she desire a man, any man, after what had been done to her? She was a runaway. She was a woman with a dark, ugly past. And Wyatt Morgan was her employer. A grieving widower. She turned her face into her pillow, her body aching with a complex mix of desire and self-loathing, and silently, she wept. A week later, Reverend Gideon arrived. He was a tall, thin man with a gaze that seemed to miss nothing and forgive less. He came to Ironwood twice a year to take collection and offer spiritual guidance, a visit Wyatt tolerated with visible impatience. He took tea in the parlor, Clara pouring, as was her duty. The girls seemed improved. "Mr. Morgan," the preacher said, stirring his cup. "Brighter. That is Mrs. Hart's doing," Wyatt said. His tone clipped. "Ah, yes, Mrs. Hart." The preacher turned his sharp eyes on Clara. "The entire valley is speaking of her. You know." Clara's hand faltered, and she spilled a drop of tea on the silver tray. "People talk," Wyatt said. "It is what they do when they have no work." "They talk," Reverend Gideon continued, ignoring him, "about a wealthy widower who takes in a strange woman, a young woman, a woman who is not his kin. They say she arrived in rags, and now she sits at his desk. What they say is not my concern," Wyatt said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "It should be," the preacher snapped, his piety turning to anger. "You have 2 young daughters in this house, Mr. Morgan. You are raising them in the shadow of temptation. You are giving comfort to a woman of unknown origins and, clearly, a flexible virtue." Clara stood frozen, the silver teapot heavy in her hand. Flexible virtue. The words were a slap. Wyatt stood up. The teacup on the table rattled. "Reverend," he said, his voice cold as the wind on the ridge, "you will take your tithe, and you will get out of my house." The preacher, stunned by the cold fury, stood as well. "I am warning you, brother. God does not look kindly on such arrangements. You are endangering your soul, and hers." "Get out," Wyatt repeated. The preacher left, his dignity punctured. Clara stood by the window and watched his buggy disappear down the muddy road. Wyatt said nothing. He walked to the liquor cabinet in his study and poured a measure of whiskey. He drank it in one swallow. For the next week, the house was cold again. Wyatt retreated into himself. He did not speak to Clara except to give orders. He did not look at her. The tentative connection, the lingering touch in the storm, the shared mornings at the desk, it was all gone. He was the master, and she was the servant. Clara felt the distance like a physical ache. She had not realized how much she had come to depend on his quiet presence, his gruff approval, the shared responsibility. Now, the silence was back, but it was worse than before. Before, it had been empty. Now, it was full of unspoken words, of anger and shame. The new coldness hurt. It hurt more than she would have ever thought possible. The final blow came from town. One of the ranch hands, Jed, returned from Junction Creek with the weekly supplies. He found Clara in the barn, checking the chicken feed. "Mrs. Hart?" he said, twisting the brim of his hat in his hands. "Jed, is something wrong? I do not know, ma'am, but I thought you should know. I was in the saloon. There is a man in town, a stranger." Clara's heart gave a single, hard thump. "He is asking questions," Jed said, lowering his voice. "He has money. He is buying drinks and asking about, well, ma'am, he is asking about a woman, a runaway." Clara leaned against the feed sack, the rough burlap scratching her back. She felt dizzy. "What? What kind of questions?" Jed looked uncomfortable. "He is describing a woman. Dark hair, gray eyes, about your height. Says she is a runaway, a criminal. Says she nearly killed a man in Kansas." Clara's vision tunneled. The barn seemed to tilt. Elias. "He sent someone. He had survived, and he wanted her back." "Jed," Clara said, her voice a dry rasp. "Did this man, did he have a name? Calls himself Red, says he is a bounty hunter." Clara nodded. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand straight. "Thank you. Jed, you did the right thing to tell me. Do not mention this to Mr. Morgan. "But ma'am, just, please, I will handle it." She walked out of the barn on steady legs. She walked across the yard, her head held high. She nodded to Mrs. Gable. She went up to her room and closed the door. She fell against it, her hand over her mouth, stifling a sob. He had found her. After all this time, the monster from her past had found her. She knew what she had to do. She could not bring this here. She could not endanger Annie and Rosie. She could not bring the violence of her old life to this house, to Wyatt. That night, she waited until the last lamp was out. She packed her single carpet bag. It was heavier now. It held the good wool dress Mrs. Gable had given her, and the boots Wyatt had bought. She put on a heavy sheepskin coat. She wrote a note, her hands shaking. "Thank you. I am sorry. I cannot stay." She left it on her pillow. She crept down the stairs, her light step making no sound. She reached the front door. Her hand was on the latch. She just had to leave, but she could not. Not without seeing them. She padded silently down the hall to the girl's room. She eased the door open. The moon was bright, a sliver of silver light cutting across the floor. Annie was sprawled on her back, her braid undone, her hair a dark halo on the pillow. Rosie was curled on her side, her thumb near her mouth, in her arms. She was clutching the one-armed rag doll, the one Clara had found and mended, sewing on a new button eye and a small patch of blue fabric for a dress. Clara stood in the doorway, her bag in her hand, the coat on her back, and looked at the sleeping children. She saw their peaceful faces, their chests rising and falling in the absolute trust of sleep. She remembered her own child, the one she had failed to save, the one she had been forced to abandon. She looked at Annie and Rosie, the children she had braided, the children she had sung to, the children who had called her name in the night. She could not run. Running was what she had done before. Running was what had cost her everything. She could not abandon these children. She would not. Slowly, she backed out of the room, pulling the door closed with a quiet click. She walked back to her own room. She took off the coat. She unpacked her bag, placing the dress back in the drawer. She sat on the edge of her bed, in the dark, and waited. She did not know what was coming. She only knew that she was done running. She would face it, here. She would not let the man from Kansas destroy this too. For 3 days, Clara lived in a state of suspended terror. She performed her duties, braided the girl's hair, read the stories, and managed the ledger. Every sound, a horse in the yard, a raised voice from the bunkhouse, the heavy tread of Wyatt's boots, made her jump. She ate little and slept less. She was a woman walking a wire, waiting for the inevitable fall. The distance from Wyatt was a tangible thing, a cold fog that filled the house. He had not spoken a word to her that was not a direct order. He had not looked at her, not truly. He was a man locked inside his own fortress, and she was outside, in the dark, with the wolves closing in. The confrontation came on the 4th night. He had been in town all day. Clara had watched him ride out, his back rigid, his duster coat settling around him. She knew, with a sick certainty, where he had gone. He had gone to see the stranger for himself. When he returned, dusk was settling, turning the muddy yard to a deep, bruised purple. He did not go to the barn. He rode his horse directly to the front porch, dismounted, and left the reins hanging. He walked into the house, his spurs ringing on the floorboards. "Mrs. Hart," he called. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the supper preparations in the kitchen. "In my study. Now, Mrs." Gable looked up, her hands white with flour. Clara wiped her own hands on her apron. Her heart was a cold stone in her chest. She nodded. She walked down the hall. The door to his study was open. He was standing at the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the fading light. He had not removed his coat. "You know there is a man in town asking for you," he said. It was not a question. Clara stood in the doorway, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. "Yes, why did you not tell me? I did not want to bring my troubles to this house. Your trouble is in this house." He turned around slowly. His face was a mask, carved from stone and shadow. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were sharp, analytical, and cold. He looked at her as if she were a line item in his ledger that did not add up. The man's name is Red. He is a bounty hunter. He says he is looking for a woman named Clara Beale, a woman who matches your description. He says she is wanted in Kansas for attempted murder. He let the words hang in the air. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the ticking of the grand clock in the hall. Clara's legs felt weak. She wanted to lean against the door frame, but she refused. She would stand. "My name was Clara Beale," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "So it is you." He looked at her, and his gaze was not one of concern, or even anger. It was something far worse. It was a cold, profound disgust. He was looking at her as Silas Henderson had, as the women in the mercantile had. He was looking at her like she was filth. "Tell me," he said, his voice flat. Clara took a breath. She had decided not to run. That meant this. She owed him this. She owed the girls this. I was married. She began... Her voice shook, but she forced it to be steady. "To a man named Elias Beale. He was a deputy in Lawrence. He was handsome. He was charming. And he was a monster." She told him everything. She spoke of the first year, the honeyed words and the closed fists. She spoke of the isolation, the way he had cut her off from the world, the way he had told her she was worthless, that he was the only one who would ever have her. "I stayed," she said, her eyes fixed on a knot in the wooden floor. "I stayed because I was a coward, and because I had nowhere to go. Then I became pregnant." Wyatt's expression did not change. He was a statue of judgment. "I was foolish. I thought it would change him. I thought of a child. I thought it would make him softer." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. It made him worse. He did not want a child. He did not want to share with me. He did not want a complication. She had to stop. The memory was a physical thing, choking her. "He told me to get rid of it. I said no, so he beat me. He beat me until I lost the child." Wyatt's jaw tightened. It was the only sign that he was even breathing. "He forced me to miscarry our child," Clara said, the words finally out, raw and bloody. "He made me bury it. And he told me if I ever got pregnant again, he would do the same." She was not crying. She was far beyond tears. She was in the cold, dead place that memory lived. A month later, he came home drunk. He wanted me, and I could not. I looked at him, and all I could see was my babies. I could not let him touch me. It made him angry. He said he would teach me my place. He grabbed his belt. She looked up, and her eyes finally met Wyatt's. "I do not remember all of it," she whispered. "I just remember the pain and the rage. It was a feeling I had never known. I thought, if he touches me one more time, I will die. Or I will kill him." He hit me with the buckle, and I fought back. For the first time, I fought back. I hit him with a cast iron skillet. I hit him, and he went down. And I kept hitting him. I do not know how many times. There was so much blood. Wyatt, I thought I had killed him. I truly did. I grabbed my bag, and I grabbed the money from his pocket, and I ran, and I did not look back. I have been running ever since. The confession was done. She had laid her ruined, ugly life at his feet. The silence in the room stretched. Wyatt just looked at her. The disgust had not faded. It had deepened, settling into a look of cold appraisal. He saw her now, a liar, a runaway, a woman who had, by her own admission, tried to kill her husband, a criminal. Clara saw it. She saw the shift in his eyes. He was not looking at the woman who read to his daughters. He was looking at Mrs. Hart, the problem, the liability. The preacher was right. She said, her voice hollow. Wyatt said nothing. Clara felt the last bit of hope, the tiny, fragile thing that had been growing in her chest, shrivel and die. She was what Elias had always said she was, worthless, a broken, dirty thing. She had been a fool to think this could be a home. She was a fool to feel safe. She was a fool to feel anything, for this man. This hard, cold man who was now looking at her as if she were something he had scraped off his boot. She nodded. A single, sharp movement. "I will leave," she said. "I will pack my things. I will be gone by morning. I am sorry, Mr. Morgan, for bringing this trouble to you, and for the girls." She turned to leave. She had to get out of this room. She had to get out of this house. "You said I could be their mother," she whispered, her hand on the doorframe. "But I cannot even live with myself." She took a step into the hall. "Stop!" His voice was a whip crack. She froze, her back to him. He had not moved. He was still standing by the window. "You lived," he said. Clara closed her eyes. It was not an absolution. It was a fact. "You lived," he repeated, his voice rougher now, as if the words were hard to find. "He beat you. He took your child. And you did not die. You lived." She heard him move, his heavy footsteps on the wooden floor. He crossed the room in 3 strides. He was standing behind her. She could feel the heat of him, the sheer size of him. She turned around, and he was there, closer than he had been since the ridge. His face was no longer cold. It was undone. It was raw. The mask was gone. She saw the man who had lost his wife. She saw the man who sat in the storm. She saw a pain that mirrored her own. He looked at her, and his eyes were not disgusted. They were something else. They were hungry. "He did not kill you," Wyatt said, his voice a low growl. "And I will not let him." And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was not the chaste, almost kiss on the ridge. It was a collision. It was a desperate, messy, passionate crash. His mouth claimed hers with a raw, sudden hunger that stunned her. His arms, strong as steel, wrapped around her, one hand tangling in her hair, the other pressing into the small of her back, pulling her against him until there was no space left between them, no air, no thought. He was a man starving, and it was the first meal he had seen in years. Clara gasped, and he swallowed the sound. The shock gave way to a surge of feeling so powerful it stole her breath. It was not just desire. It was rage and grief and a terrible, aching loneliness. It was every unspoken word, every shared glance, every moment of tension. It was the touch in the storm. It was the coat on the bench. It was everything. She kissed him back. She clutched his coat, her fingers digging into the heavy wool. She met his hunger with her own. She was not the broken thing from Kansas. She was not a victim. She was here, and she was alive, and she was kissing Wyatt Morgan. He deepened the kiss, his tongue tracing her lips, asking for entry, and she gave it. The taste of him was whiskey and cold air and a desperate, masculine salt. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. He broke the kiss only to bury his face in her neck, breathing her in. "Clara," he rasped against her skin, and the sound of her name, in his voice, made her knees buckle. He caught her. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. His arms looped under her legs, and she was cradled against his broad chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck, her heart hammering. "Wyatt," she breathed. He did not speak. He carried her out of the study, down the hall, past the silent, disapproving portraits of his ancestors. He did not take her to her small, narrow bed at the end of the hall. He took her to his room. He shouldered the door open and kicked it shut behind him. The room was dark, the curtains drawn. It was a purely male space, smelling of him, of leather and wood smoke. It was the room he had shared with Elizabeth. He did not set her down. He carried her to the massive 4-poster bed and laid her gently on the quilt. He stood over her, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling. The moonlight from a gap in the curtains cut across his face. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her skin burn. He began to unbutton his coat, his eyes never leaving hers. Then his vest. He was slow, deliberate. He was unarming himself. Clara lay on the bed, her heart in her throat. This was the moment when the man took what he wanted. She knew this moment. She knew the pain that followed. She flinched, her body tensing. bracing for the inevitable cruelty. He saw it. He saw the fear in her eyes, the way her hands clenched the quilt, and he stopped. He sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her. He put his head in his hands. The broad shoulders shook. "Just once, damn it," he whispered to the floor. "Clara," he said, his voice muffled. I will not be him." He turned, and the raw tenderness in his face broke her heart. He did not look at her like Elias, with hunger and contempt. He looked at her like she was sacred. He reached out, not to grab, but to offer. His hand, calloused and warm, hovered in the air. She met him halfway, placing her hand in his. He laced his fingers through hers. He began slowly. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. He unbuttoned the cuff of her dress, his fingers sure and gentle. He pushed the sleeve up her arm, his gaze following the movement. He leaned down and kissed the pale skin of her wrist. He undressed her like a man unwrapping a priceless, fragile gift. Each button was a prayer. Each layer of fabric he peeled away was an act of reverence. He kissed her shoulder. He kissed the hollow of her throat. He kissed the scars, the old, faded white lines on her back that she had told him about. He kissed them, and his lips were a balm, healing the memory of the blows that had made them. He explored her broken, battered body not with a man's urgent lust, but with a worshipper's devotion. He learned her shape, the curve of her hip, the line of her collarbone. And when she was bare, she did not feel shame. She did not feel exposed. For the first time in her life, she felt beautiful. He shed his own clothes in the darkness, and when he came to her, when his skin touched hers, it was not an invasion. It was a homecoming. He made love to her slowly, with a tenderness that bordered on pain. He taught her body a new language, a language that was not about power and submission, but about giving and receiving. He showed her what it meant to be touched by someone who wanted to give her pleasure, not just take his own. He held her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks, and looked into her eyes. He wanted her to see him. He wanted her to know that he was here. He was with her, not the ghost from Kansas. And when he finally joined their bodies, Clara did not cry out in pain. She gasped. It was a sound of release, of acceptance. Later, she lay tangled in his arms, her head on his chest. The house was silent. She could hear the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath her ear. The tears came then. Not the hot, angry tears of her past, but slow, quiet tears of a profound, shattering relief. Wyatt tensed. "Clara, did I hurt you?" She shook her head, her tears spotting his chest. She lifted her head to look at him. His hair was mussed, his face soft in the moonlight. "I have never," she whispered, her voice thick. "I have never been touched. Like I mattered. Like I was good." His expression hardened. He wrapped his arms around her more tightly, pulling her up so her eyes were level with his. "You matter," he said, his voice fierce, a vow. "To me, you matter." He kissed her again. A long, slow, deep kiss that was a promise. Then he settled her head back on his chest. "Sleep," he commanded, but his voice was gentle. And for the first time in more years than she could count, Clara Hart slept a deep, dreamless sleep, held safe in the arms of a man she was beginning to trust. She slept, and there were no ghosts, no sound of crying in the night. The next morning, she woke up alone in the massive bed. For a moment, she thought she had dreamed it, but the indent of his head was on the pillow next to hers. The room smelled of him. She rose, her body sore but alive, and dressed. She went downstairs, her heart uncertain. He was in the dining room. The girls were there, eating oatmeal. The morning was bright, the sun streaming in. It was all so terribly normal. Wyatt looked up when she entered. His face was unreadable. He had shaved. He was the master of ironwood again. "Good morning, Mrs. Hart," he said. Clara's heart sank. It was a dream. He was ashamed. He was pushing her away again. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice small, her eyes on the floor. She moved to the sideboard to pour coffee. "Annie," Wyatt said, his voice sharp. Annie looked up, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Yes, Pa? From now on," Wyatt said, his eyes on Clara's back. "You and Rosie will refer to Mrs. Hart by her proper title." Annie looked confused. "But we do. We call her Mrs. Hart." "No," Wyatt said. He stood up. He walked over to Clara at the sideboard. He put his hand on her shoulder. She froze, the coffee pot in her hand. "You will call her Mama." Clara dropped the pot. It hit the sideboard with a clatter, coffee splashing everywhere. She stared at him, her eyes wide, her mouth open. Annie's jaw dropped. Rosie, who had been painting a picture in her oatmeal, looked up, her face lighting with a slow, dawning joy. "Mama?" Rosie whispered, the word a question. Wyatt's hand squeezed Clara's shoulder. He looked down at his daughters. "That is what I said. She is your mama now." Annie's confusion melted into a wide, unbelievable beam. She had not smiled like that since before her mother died. She looked from her father to Clara, her eyes shining. Rosie scrambled off her chair. She ran to Clara and wrapped her arms around her legs, burying her face in her skirt. "Mama," she said again, the word muffled but certain. Clara could not speak. She could not breathe. She looked at Wyatt, tears streaming down her face. He was not smiling, but his eyes were. He was looking at her like she was at the sunrise. He nodded, just once, as if to say, "It is done." He turned and walked to the hall. He picked up his hat. "Jed," he called out, "saddle my horse and send 6 of the men into town." Clara, wiping her eyes, looked at him in confusion. "I want them to find Mr. Red," Wyatt said, his voice back to its normal, hard command. "I want to know where he eats, where he sleeps, and where he shits. I want to know everything." He put on his hat and walked out the door. A man who had made a decision, and a man who was now preparing for a war. Wyatt's men returned 2 days later, not with a stranger, but with his story. Jed found Wyatt in the barn, reshoeing the mare Clara now rode. "He is not a legal man." "Mr. Morgan," Jed said, his voice low, twisting his hat. "He has no papers. He is not a marshal, not even a Pinkerton." Wyatt brought the hoof down and straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. He knew it. The man had the smell of a vulture, not a lawman. "He is a hired gun," Jed continued, "and he has been living on one man's coin for 6 months. A man from Kansas, a deputy named Elias Beale." Wyatt's hand stilled. He looked at Jed, his eyes flat and cold. "Beale hired him to find his wife. Seems this Beale tells a story about how she ran off, how she is touched in the head. But the men in town, the ones Red bought drinks for, they heard him brag. He said the deputy did not just want her back. He wanted her punished." "Where is he?" Wyatt asked, his voice quiet. "Holed up at the Junction Creek Saloon. Has not left his room in a day. Waiting." Wyatt threw the rag down. "Saddle my horse." He did not ride to Junction Creek. He consumed the miles. He walked into the saloon, and the midday drinkers, the gamblers, the lone prostitute at the piano player. They all fell silent. Wyatt Morgan did not come to town for pleasure. He saw the man in the back corner, eating a plate of steak and eggs. He was a large man, barrel-chested, with a tangled red beard that gave him his name. He looked up, his fork halfway to his mouth, and a slow, greasy smile spread across his face. "Wyatt Morgan. I figured I would be seeing you." Wyatt walked to the table. He did not sit. "You are done here," Wyatt said. Red chuckled, a wet sound, and speared a piece of meat. "I am not done until the job is done, and the job is just about to get interesting. You are not a bounty hunter. You are a procurer. Call me what you like. The pay is the same. That is a fine piece of land you have, Morgan. But you are soft, taking in strays. That stray is property, and the owner wants her back. He is alive. Then, Beale, alive?" Red laughed, leaning back. "Oh, he is alive. Got a scar that would make a devil wince. But he is alive, and he is angry. He is the law in his county, and he does not like being disrespected." Wyatt leaned in, placing both hands flat on the man's table. The whiskey glasses rattled. You will ride out. You will go back to Kansas, and you will tell Elias Beale that if he ever wants to see his wife again, he can look for her in hell, because she is dead. Clara Beale died on the road. The woman at my ranch is Clara Morgan, and she is my wife." Red's smile faltered. He had not counted on this. He had counted on a soft-hearted widower, not a claimant. That complicates the payment. "You sent a wire," Wyatt stated. Red's eyes shifted. "I do not know what you mean." "You sent a wire 3 days ago. You told him where she is." "Wyatt, I am just a man doing a job. You will ride east," Wyatt said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more dangerous than a shout. "If you are not past the county line by sundown, my men will find you, and when they do, you will leave Junction Creek in a pine box." He straightened up. He turned and walked out of the saloon. The silence held until the doors swung shut, and then broke into a flurry of excited, fearful whispers. Red stared at his plate, his appetite gone. He knew a threat when he heard one. He also knew his work was done. The wire had been sent. The wolves were already on their way. When Wyatt returned, the ranch was quiet, the late afternoon sun casting long, peaceful shadows. Clara was in the kitchen, teaching Annie how to knead dough. Rosie was at the table, drawing a picture of the house on a piece of brown paper. The scene was so normal, so heartbreakingly domestic. It made Wyatt's gut twist. "Clara," he said from the doorway. She looked up, a smudge of flour on her cheek, her smile bright. The smile faded the instant she saw his face. "Annie, Rosie, go with Mrs. Gable. Pa, we are baking," Annie protested. "Now." The command in his voice was absolute. The girls, their eyes wide with sudden fear, scrambled out of the room. Mrs. Gable, who had heard it all, shooed them toward the cellar. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. "What is it? You are frightening me." He told her. He told her about Red, about the wire, about Elias. "He is alive, and he knows where you are." The transformation was immediate and terrifying. The woman who had laughed, the woman who had cried in his arms, the woman who had woken up that morning as Mama, she vanished. In her place was the gaunt, haunted creature he had found at his gate. Her face went ashen. Her body began to shake. "No," she whispered. "Oh, God, no!" She backed away from him, her hands flying to her head. "He is a monster. He is a deputy. He will come with the law. He will take me. He will not take you," Wyatt said, advancing on her. "Clara, you do not understand. He will kill you. He will hurt the girls to get to me. He will burn this place to the ground." She was not just afraid. She was in a blind, primal panic. She ran past him, toward the stairs. "I have to leave. I have to run. I can be gone before he gets here. He wants me. Wyatt, not you. I will not. I will not." She was halfway up the stairs when he caught her. He grabbed her arm. It was not a gentle touch. It was hard, desperate. She fought him, her fists beating against his chest, a keening sound rising in her throat. "Let me go! Let me go! You do not know him! Let me go! No!" He roared, his voice echoing in the house. He shook her, once, hard, to make her stop. She froze, her eyes wild, her breath coming in sobs. He gripped her upper arms, his fingers digging in, forcing her to look at him. "This is your home now," he said, his voice a low, fierce growl. "This is our home. You will not run. We will not run. I am a coward." She wept, her forehead falling against his chest. "I have always been a coward." "No," he said, his arms wrapping around her, crushing her to him. "You are not. You are a survivor, but you are done surviving alone." He held her, his chin resting on the top of her head, as the sobs racked her body. He held her until the shaking stopped, until her breath evened out. Then he set her back, his hands on her shoulders. He looked into her red-rimmed eyes. "He will not take you, Clara. No man touches you unless he goes through me. Do you understand?" She looked at him, the panic fading, replaced by a new, cold terror. "He is coming." Wyatt nodded, his face grim. Then we will be ready. The ranch became a fortress. The serenity of the past weeks shattered. Wyatt was no longer a father or a lover. He was a commander. He called his men, all 24 of them. They were not just ranch hands. They were veterans. Men who had fought in the war or against the Sioux. They were hard men, loyal to the man who paid them and, more, to the man who had earned their respect. He laid it out simply. The ranch was going to be attacked. The woman of the house was in danger. Their orders were to protect the house, and especially the woman and the children, at all costs. They did not ask questions. They just nodded and went to work. Windows were boarded, leaving only small slits for rifles. Barrels of water were placed by the doors to douse fires. Ammunition boxes were stacked in the parlor. The bunkhouse was abandoned. Every man would fight from the main house and the barn. Jed was sent on the fastest horse to Junction Creek, not to the saloon, but to the sheriff's office, with a sealed letter from Wyatt. Wyatt took Clara to the barn. The tension hummed in the air, a metallic taste. He unlocked a heavy wooden crate. Inside, nestled in oilcloth, were rifles, Winchesters. He handed one to her. The wood was dark, the metal cold and heavy. "Do you know how to use this?" he asked. She shook her head, her eyes wide. "Elias, he never allowed me to touch his weapon?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Of course he did not. A man like that prefers his victims unarmed. He stood behind her. He did not put his arms around her. This was not an embrace. It was a lesson in death. This is your new life." "Clara," he said, his voice flat. "All business. You are not the woman he knew. That woman is gone." He placed her hands on the rifle. "Here, and here. You brace it against your shoulder. Tight. If you do not, the kick will break your collarbone." He spent an hour with her. He made her load it, aim it, and dry fire it at a spot on the barn wall until the movement was no longer clumsy. "You do not aim for the man," he said, his voice a low murmur. "You aim for the center of his chest. You do not think. You do not hesitate. You squeeze the trigger. You do not pull it. Squeeze." She was a fast learner. The terror gave her a sharp, brittle focus. He handed her a revolver. A Colt with a pearl handle. It was smaller, heavier than it looked. "The rifle is for the window." He said, This is for close. If they get in, you keep this on you. You do not, under any circumstances, let them take you. Do you understand me?" She looked at the gun, then at his hard, unforgiving face. Wyatt, I am not a killer." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "You are not. You are a survivor. You are a mother. Rosie and Annie are in this house. You will do what you must." He was right. The thought of Elias's hands, his hands, on Rosie or Annie. A cold, clean rage cut through her fear. She nodded, her hand closing around the grip of the revolver. "I will." The storm hit on the third night. It was a brutal, cold rain, driven by a wind that howled like a mourning woman. The sky was black, the world reduced to the sound of the gale and the rattling of the boarded-up windows. Clara was in the cellar with Mrs. Gable and the girls. The cellar was cold and smelled of damp earth and potatoes. Rosie was asleep in her arms, but Annie was sitting straight up, her eyes wide. "Is Pa going to be all right?" Annie asked, her voice small. "Your father is the toughest man in this territory," Clara said, her voice more certain than she felt. "He will be fine. We will all be fine. Mrs." Gable was praying in the corner, her rosary beads clicking. The first gunshot was unmistakable. It was sharper than the thunder. Closer. Annie jumped. Clara pulled her close, her arm wrapping around both girls. "It is all right," Clara whispered, her heart hammering. "It is just the storm." But it was not. More shots followed. A volley from the yard, answered by the deeper booms of the ranch hands' rifles from the house above. Shouting, the shattering of glass. The cellar door was thrown open. Wyatt stood there, a silhouette against the chaos. "They are here," he said, his voice calm. "Mrs. Gable, keep them down. Clara, I need you." Clara looked at him. This was the moment. She kissed Rosie's forehead, then Annie's. "Stay with Mrs." Gable, do not move. She handed the sleeping Rosie to the housekeeper and stood up. She followed Wyatt up the stairs, the revolver heavy in her hand. The house was a war zone. The parlor was filled with smoke that burned her eyes. Men were crouched by the windows, firing into the darkness. A man ran past the window, a torch in his hand, making for the barn. One of Wyatt's men fired. The man fell. The torch sputtered in the mud. "Getting to the landing," Wyatt yelled over the din, pushing her toward the stairs. "Cover the upstairs. Do not let anyone pass." Clara ran up the stairs, her skirt tangling in her feet. She crouched behind the thick oak banister, her rifle pointing down the hall. The fighting was furious. They were trying to breach the front door, using a log as a ram. Wyatt, a rifle in his hand, stood by the parlor window. He fired, worked the lever, fired again. He was a machine. A man's face appeared at a broken window, a shotgun nosing through. "Wyatt!" another hand yelled. Wyatt turned. The shotgun blasted. The room exploded in sound and flame. Wyatt grunted, spinning around, clutching his shoulder. He fell back against the wall, his rifle clattering to the floor. "Wyatt!" Clara screamed. She started to run down the stairs, but he roared at her. "Stay there. It is my shoulder. It is just a graze. Stay at your post." She hesitated, her heart in her throat. He was her. He was leaning against the wall, his face pale, but he was already picking up his rifle with his good hand. The front door splintered, then burst open. 2 men poured in, yelling. Wyatt's men cut them down, but the breach was made. Clara heard a noise, not from the front, but from the back, from the kitchen. A window shattered. She ran down the hall to the landing that overlooked the back of the house. A man was climbing through the kitchen window. Another was already inside. They were not ranch hands. They were strangers. "Rosie!" The thought hit Clara like a physical blow. The cellar door was in the kitchen. She flew down the hall. She saw Rosie, who had woken from the noise and slipped away from Mrs. Gable, standing in the kitchen doorway, rubbing her eyes. "Mama?" Rosie said, her voice small. One of the men, a rough-looking man with a missing eye, saw her. He grinned and started toward her. "Get the kid," he said. "She will make a good shield." Clara did not think. She did not aim. She just brought the revolver up, the one Wyatt had given her, and pulled the trigger. Squeeze. The sound was deafening in the hallway. The man jerked, a look of profound surprise on his face. He clutched his chest and fell backward, crashing into the table. The other man raised his pistol, but Clara was already firing again and again. She emptied the revolver, the bullets thudding into the wall, the man scrambling back out the window, screaming. She stood there, shaking, the gun smoking in her hand. The smell of sulfur and death filled her nose. She was going to be sick. Rosie was screaming. Clara dropped the gun, ran to her, and scooped her up. She ran to the cellar, shoved Rosie into Mrs. Gable's arms, and slammed the heavy door, dropping the bar. She turned. The house was quieter. The main gunfight had moved outside, toward the barn. She walked back into the parlor, her legs shaking. Clara, the voice from her nightmares. She turned. He was standing in the parlor, as if he belonged there. He was holding a lantern. He was older, thinner than she remembered. A long, white scar, a gift from her skillet, ran from his temple to his chin. Elias Beale smiled. "You have made a terrible mess, my dear." Clara stared at him, her blood turning to ice. Her empty gun was on the floor in the kitchen. He was clean. His coat was dry. He had waited until his men had done the fighting. "I have come a long, long way for you. Clara," she backed away, her hands raised. "Get out." "Or what?" he mocked. He set the lantern down on the piano. "You will hit me with a pan. You always were a disappointment. Look at this. Playing house in a rich man's mansion. Did you think I would not find you?" She saw the revolver on the floor, the one Wyatt had dropped. It was 10 feet away. "You think this bastard loves you?" Elias sneered, taking a step toward her. "He does not even know you. He does not know the things I know." He does not know the filth you are. She lunged for the gun. He was faster. He kicked it away, and it skidded across the floor. He grabbed her hair, yanking her head back. "You will never be anything but mine," he whispered, his face close to hers, his breath hot and smelling of whiskey. "You belong to me." "No!" She screamed it, a raw, animal sound. She brought her knee up, hard, into his groin. He roared in pain, his hand letting go of her hair. She scrambled for the gun. She got her hand on it. She turned, raising it. He was already raising his own. "Clara, don't—" Wyatt was in the doorway. He was leaning heavily, his left arm a bloody sling, but his right hand held his own Colt, and it was trained steadily on Elias's chest. "He is a monster." "Wyatt." Clara wept, the gun shaking in her hand. "I know," Wyatt said, his voice strained, his face slick with sweat. "But he is not worth it. He is not worth you." Elias laughed, a pained, wheezing sound. How touching. "You're going to shoot me. Rancher, my wife is a wanted criminal. I am the law." Wyatt's gaze did not waver. "You are not the law. You are just a man, and you are trespassing." "Wyatt," Clara said. "He is right. He will just— You already won." "Clara," Wyatt cut in, his eyes finding hers. She looked at him, confused. "You lived. That is how you beat him. You lived." "Do not let him turn you into him. Not now." Setting down his weapon, the front door crashed open. "Elias Beale, drop your weapon." The sheriff, flanked by Jed and 2 deputies, his gun drawn. It was a setup. Wyatt had not sent Jed for help. He had sent him for the law, to be here at exactly this moment. Elias stared, his face a mask of disbelief, as he was surrounded. He was the law. He could not be arrested. He dropped his gun. The sheriff cuffed him. As they dragged him out, Elias's eyes found Clara. "You will always be my whore." "Clara," he screamed. "You will always be mine." Then he was gone, dragged out into the rain. The parlor was silent, save for the sound of the storm and Clara's ragged breathing. The adrenaline fled. The gun slipped from her fingers. She turned to Wyatt. His face was a ghostly white. The front of his shirt was soaked in blood. Wyatt? He was not looking at her. He was looking at the floor. His eyes rolled back. He slid down the doorframe, leaving a long, terrible smear of red. He collapsed onto the floor and did not move. For a second, Clara was frozen. The man who could not be broken was broken. "Wyatt!" she screamed, her voice cracking. She ran to him, falling to her knees in the pool of his blood. "Wyatt!" She pressed her hands to the wound, but the blood was everywhere. "Help!" she shrieked, her voice raw. "Somebody help me! Mrs. Gable, help!" The first week was a blur of blood and laudanum. Wyatt Morgan, a man who had seemed carved from the unyielding granite of the Wyoming mountains, was reduced to a state of harrowing frailty. The shotgun pellets had torn through his shoulder, shattering parts of his collarbone and ripping through the muscle. The town doctor, who had arrived with the sheriff, had spent 3 hours in the parlor, now a makeshift infirmary, digging out the lead and stitching the ragged edges of the wound. He had given Clara a grim prognosis. He would live, but the fever would be the true test. Clara never left his side. She was the one who, with a stomach of iron she never knew she possessed, held the lantern as the doctor worked, her hand steady, even as the smell of blood and whiskey-soaked rags filled the room. She was the one who learned to clean the wound, to change the bandages, to ignore Wyatt's pained, fever-driven curses and hold him down when the nightmares of the fight, or perhaps the war, made him thrash. The house, scarred by bullet holes and the memory of the invasion, became a quiet sick room. Mrs. Gable, her former suspicion of Clara burned away by the shared terror and replaced with a grudging, profound respect, took over the running of the house with a grim efficiency. She kept the men fed, the broth for Wyatt hot, and the girls quiet. Annie and Rosie were shadows in the healing house. The night of the attack had scarred them. Too, Rosie, for days, would not speak. She would only cling to Clara's skirts, her small face pale, her thumb permanently in her mouth. Annie, her father's daughter, processed her fear as anger. She stomped through the house, glaring at the patched bullet holes, her small fists clenched. But it was Clara they sought. Both girls, as if by an unspoken agreement, refused to be put to bed by Mrs. Gable. They would wait, their small bodies huddled in their nightgowns at the top of the stairs, until Clara could leave Wyatt's side for a few minutes. She would come up, her hands smelling of antiseptic and her face gray with exhaustion, and they would fall on her. "Please do not go," Annie would command, her voice trying to be fierce but trembling. Rosie would just bury her face in Clara's waist. "You are our real mama now. The man said so. He said Clara Morgan." Clara would hold them, her heart aching. "I am not going anywhere. I will never, ever leave you. I promise." She would tuck them in, sing the lullaby of the riverboat, and wait until their breathing was deep, and even before she crept back downstairs to the parlor, to the man who was fighting his way back to them. On the 9th day, the fever broke. Clara was dozing in the chair by his bed, her head nodding, when a voice, dry and unfamiliar, Raz_ped her name. "Clara." Her head snapped up. Wyatt was awake. His eyes were open, and for the first time in over a week, they were clear. The fever haze was gone. He looked at her, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Water," he whispered. She flew to the pitcher, her hands shaking so hard she spilled half the glass. She brought it to his lips, her arm supporting his head. He drank a long, greedy pull. He sank back against the pillows, his breath catching in a pained sigh. "The girls?" he managed. "Safe," Clara said, her voice thick with tears she refused to shed. "They are safe, upstairs, sleeping. And Beale, the sheriff has him. He is gone. Wyatt, the doctor said he will be tried in Cheyenne. He will not be back." Wyatt closed his eyes, a profound relief settling on his features. He was pale, gaunt, and had lost a shocking amount of weight. The dark beard on his cheeks was matted. "You look terrible," he whispered. Clara let out a choked sound that was half a laugh, half a sob. "So do you." She took a cloth and dipped it in the cool water, gently wiping the sweat and grime from his face, from his neck. Her touch was not a nurse's, it was a wife's. His good hand, his right, which had been lying useless on the coverlet, twitched. It moved, slow as a glacier, across the sheets until his fingers found her wrist. He did not have the strength to grip it, but he held on. "You saved me," he breathed, his thumb moving a fraction of an inch on her skin. Clara shook her head, her tears finally falling. Spotting his hand, "No. Wyatt, you saved me. You saved me from him. You saved me from the moment I walked to your gate." She leaned her forehead down onto their joined hands, her shoulders shaking. "You saved me from more than him. You saved me from myself. I was a ghost. I was nothing, and you made me a mother." He was quiet for a long time. She thought he had fallen back asleep. She kept her head down, just feeling the improbable, steady warmth of his skin. "Clara." She looked up. He was watching her, his dark eyes filled with an emotion she had only seen glimpses of before. It was the raw, unguarded look from the night he had first taken her to his bed, the look of a man stripped of all his defenses. He was afraid, not of death, but of what he was about to say. "I love you," he said. The words were a painful rasp, as if they had been trapped in his chest for a lifetime and were now being pulled free. Clara's breath hitched. She could only stare at him. He swallowed, his gaze holding hers, refusing to let her look away. "I love you," he repeated, his voice stronger, as if the first confession had cleared the path. Not just for the girls, not because you are their mother." He took a shaky breath, the effort costing him. "For me, for everything I lost, and for everything I found again. I found you." Clara's world, which had been spinning in a chaotic, terrifying orbit for months, clicked into place. The fear, the shame, the running, it all fell away. There was only this man, this broken, beautiful, strong man who was looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world. She leaned down and kissed him. It was not a passionate kiss. It was a kiss of profound, staggering gratitude. It was a kiss of salt and fever, of promise and acceptance. "I love you, Wyatt Morgan," she whispered against his lips. "I love you so much." He smiled, a true, unguarded smile that lit his ravaged face. It was the first time she'd ever seen him truly smile. "Good," he breathed. "Now, more water, and tell Mrs. Gable, I want steak." Clara laughed, the tears streaming down her face. She knew, in that moment, that he was going to be fine. Wyatt's recovery was slow, but it was total. He was an impatient patient, and by the third week, he was sitting up, his arm in a heavy sling, barking orders from the parlor. By the fourth, he was walking the porch, his face turned to the weak spring sun, his jaw set in stubborn determination. His return to life changed the house. The men who had been walking on eggshells began to relax. The sounds of ranch work, of hammers and saws repairing the barn, of cattle lowing in the distance, returned. And with the house healing, the family healed. Annie's anger dissipated, replaced by a bossy attentiveness to her father. Rosie began to speak again, and now she chattered, her high, clear voice a constant, happy sound in the halls. One bright May afternoon, when the mud had dried and the first wildflowers were dotting the fields, Wyatt found Clara in the kitchen garden, planting herbs. He stood by the fence, his good hand resting on the post, and watched her. She had a streak of dirt on her nose, and her hair was coming loose from its braid. She was humming the riverboat lullaby. "Clara," he said. She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun. She smiled, that new, real smile that still made his chest ache. "Come with me." "Where?" He did not answer, just turned and walked toward the barn. She dusted the dirt from her hands onto her apron and followed. He led her inside. The barn was cool and quiet, smelling of hay and leather and horses. The afternoon light streamed in through the high doors, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. Mrs. Gable was there, dressed in her Sunday black, which she had not worn since Elizabeth's funeral. Annie and Rosie were standing beside her, their hair braided with blue ribbons, holding a jar of wildflowers. "Wyatt, what is this?" Clara asked, her voice faltering. Wyatt walked to her. He was not in his work clothes. He wore his good black vest and a clean white shirt. He looked nervous. "The preacher is a hypocrite," Wyatt said, as if that explained everything. "And I will not have my wife, or my daughters, be the subject of gossip ever again." He took her hand, the one that was not covered in dirt. "Clara Hart," he said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate growl that was only for her. "I have loved you since you walked out of a blizzard and had the audacity to ask me for work. I was just too stubborn and too stupid to know it." Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "We are doing this backward. I know, but I will not spend another day with you as anything less than my wife, in name, in law, in the eyes of God. If he is watching—" He looked over at Mrs. Gable, who was already sniffing into a handkerchief. "Mrs. Gable," he said, "you will be our witness." The older woman just nodded, her face a mask of profound, teary joy. Wyatt turned back to Clara. He did not have a ring. He had not thought that far. Instead, he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the pearl-handled revolver he had given her. He held it out to her. "Grip first. This is all I have," he said. "It is the only thing I could think of. You are a fighter. Clara, you are the strongest person I have ever known. But I want you to know, you never have to fight alone again." Clara looked at the gun, the weapon she had used to defend her child. She looked at this man, who understood her, who saw not her shame but her strength. She did not take the gun. Instead, she threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him off balance. "Yes," she cried into his shoulder. Yes, I will. The wedding was 5 minutes long. Mrs. Gable read a passage from her own prayer book. Wyatt and Clara spoke no formal vows. They just faced each other, their hands clasped. "I will," Wyatt said, his voice thick. "I will," Clara whispered, and then he kissed her. Annie and Rosie cheered, throwing their wildflowers into the air, the petals raining down on them in the dusty light. That night, their lovemaking was not the desperate, frantic finding of their first time. It was not a collision. It was knowing. It was a slow, sacred exploration. He undressed her in their room, his room, which was now their room. His arm, still stiff, was clumsy with the buttons. And she helped him. There was no shame. There was no fear. He laid her on the bed and just looked at her, his eyes tracing every line of her body in the moonlight. "My wife," he said, the word tasting new in his mouth. He touched her as he had that first night, not with hunger, but with reverence. He touched her like she mattered, and this time, she believed it. She learned his body, too. The map of scars from the war, the new, puckered scar on his shoulder. She kissed it. She kissed the place that had bled for her. They spoke between gasps, between touches. "I was so afraid," she whispered, her hand in his hair. "Of Beale?" he murmured, his lips at her throat. "Of this, of being happy. I did not think I was allowed." He held her face, his gaze intense. "You are allowed everything." They held each other for hours, their bodies a slow, easy rhythm, two halves of a whole, finding their fit. They held each other like salvation, like two survivors who had finally found shore. The summer that followed was a season of healing. The bullet holes in the parlor were patched and painted. The grass on the plains grew tall and green. The ranch, which had been a fortress of grief, became a home. Clara found her place not just in the house, but in the land. She rode with Wyatt, his sling eventually discarded, his strength returning. She learned the ranch, not as an accountant, but as its mistress. She learned the smell of the wind before a rain, the call of the hawks, the rhythm of the herds. One afternoon, she rode out alone, up to the high ridge, the place Wyatt had taken her, the place where Elizabeth had died. Clara dismounted and walked to the small, simple wooden cross that marked the grave. The wind was gentle here, the view vast. She knelt in the grass. She had brought a cutting of the wild roses that grew by the kitchen. She dug a small hole with her hands and planted the rose. "I do not know if you can hear me," Clara whispered to the wind, "but thank you for the girls, and for him. I am taking care of them. I promise I will love them enough for both of us." She stood there for a long time, at peace, a silent communion between the two women who had loved Wyatt Morgan. Life settled. The girls' laughter was the soundtrack of the ranch. Rosie, who had been a silent mouse, was now a fearless tomboy, always covered in dirt, her hair escaping its braids. Annie, her sharp edges softened by security and love, was growing into a smart, capable young woman, her father's shadow, her mother's confidant. They called her Mama now, without thought, without pause. It was her name. One late summer night, the air just beginning to hint at the chill of autumn. Clara was sitting on the porch, mending one of Rosie's torn dresses. Wyatt came and sat beside her, leaning his chair back against the house, his boots up on the rail. The crickets were a loud chorus in the twilight. He took her hand, the one that was not sewing, and brought it to his lips. "You are smiling," he said. "Was I?" Clara replied, a soft smile touching her lips again. "Yes, you do that, now. When you do not think anyone is looking." She looked at him. His face was relaxed, the harsh lines softened by the dim light. She felt a surge of love so powerful it almost hurt. "I was just thinking." She said, "That is usually dangerous." She playfully swatted his arm. "I was thinking, this house is so full. It is so full of laughter, noise, and life." She put down her sewing and turned to him. What if we try for another?" Wyatt's chair legs hit the porch with a thud. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers in the dusk. He saw no ghosts there, no fear, only her, only his wife. He did not speak. He leaned forward, and with a tenderness that still made her heart leap, he placed his hand on her stomach, over her dress. He leaned down, out of his chair. kneeling on the porch. He pressed his lips to the spot. A long, silent kiss that was a prayer, and a promise, and an answer. That night, they slept in each other's arms, tangled in the sheets. The window was open, and the cool night air carried the scent of pine and curing hay. Outside, the land that had once been a brutal, unforgiving wilderness was now just their home. The house, once cold and silent, was warm, filled with the steady breathing of their children. They slept, a family, a life not given, but earned, a future built not on what was lost, but on what, against all odds, had been found. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this, and share your thoughts with us in English.